The chamber was huge and filled with creatures from 1,000 different worlds. Some had scales that shimmered under the artificial lights, while others had skin that looked like living metal. There were beings made of pure energy contained in force fields, and others that seemed to be walking plants. In the center of this grand hall stood a single human named Daniel Hayes. He wore a simple dark suit that looked plain compared to the exotic clothing of the other council members. His hair had turned gray at the sides, and his face showed the lines of someone who had spent many years dealing with difficult people. He stood with his hands behind his back and waited for the council to finish laughing at him. The laughter was not pleasant. It came from throats and voice boxes that had never evolved on Earth. Some sounds were high-pitched clicks, while others were deep rumbles that made the floor vibrate. All of it was mocking, and all of it was directed at the human ambassador who had just asked for help. Counselor Zareth was the first to speak clearly. He was tall and looked like an insect that had grown to the size of a building. His mouth parts moved in a way that the translation device said was amusement. He told the other council members that the humans wanted military aid, and perhaps they should also give them pointed sticks to fight with. This made everyone laugh even harder. Daniel did not move. He had learned long ago that sometimes staying quiet was more powerful than shouting. He had been an ambassador for 20 years, and had dealt with people who thought they were better than him. This was nothing new. A creature that looked like a giant cat with purple and gold fur spoke next. Her name was Selene, and her voice came out smooth and sweet like honey mixed with poison. She reminded Daniel that Earth had only been part of the Council for 3 years. She said that humans had no real fleet and no weapons that could do anything against Council shields. She wanted to know why the Council should waste resources defending a primitive world that nobody cared about. The words hung in the air, and Daniel let them sit there for a moment. He knew what they thought of Earth. Humans were newcomers who had barely figured out how to travel between stars. Compared to species that had been exploring space for thousands of years, Earth was like a child playing with toys. But Daniel also knew things that these council members did not know. He knew secrets that his government had kept hidden for decades. He knew that sometimes looking weak was the best kind of strength. So he stood there and let them think they were right. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm and steady, like a man ordering coffee rather than begging for the survival of his species. He told them that the Kryn swarm was 3 months away from Earth. He explained that the swarm would consume his world and then continue toward the core systems where all the important council worlds were located. Earth was not asking for charity. Earth was offering to be the first line of defense. Counselor Vorn spoke up then. Vorn was a being made of living crystal that bent light into rainbow patterns when he moved. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. He asked what defense Earth could possibly offer. He said that the entire human military could not slow the swarm for even 1 day. He called sending help to Earth a waste of resources on something that was already doomed. Daniel corrected him gently. He said Earth was asking for help. He did not raise his voice or show anger. He simply stated a fact. Zareth made a clicking sound that the translator called dismissive laughter. He announced that the council had voted before Daniel even arrived. The decision was final. No aid would be sent to Earth. He suggested that humans evacuate anyone important and leave the rest to be processed by the swarm. He called this the natural order of things. Daniel repeated the word slowly. The natural order of things. He looked around the chamber at all these powerful beings who thought they ruled the galaxy. He looked at their expensive clothes and their advanced technology, and their absolute certainty that they were superior to humanity. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. The council members tensed slightly. Some had weapons that could be activated with a thought. Others had personal shields that could stop anything short of a nuclear explosion. But Daniel only pulled out a small data chip. He placed it carefully on the podium in front of him. He told them that the chip contained Earth's formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The withdrawal was effective immediately. He thanked them for their time in a voice that suggested he was not thankful at all. The chamber went completely silent, the kind of silence that happens when something unexpected occurs and nobody knows how to react. Selene was the first to recover. She asked Daniel if he understood what he was doing. She explained that without council protection, Earth would be truly alone. No trade agreements, no technology sharing, no diplomatic immunity, nothing. Daniel said that Earth understood this perfectly well. Vorn's crystal body pulsed with colors that meant contempt. He asked if Daniel was condemning his entire species to death just because of wounded pride. Daniel picked up his briefcase. It was an old leather case that had belonged to his grandfather. He turned toward the exit doors, which were at least 50 meters away. Before he started walking, he paused and looked back one last time at the assembled council. He told them that his people had a saying, "You never know what you have until it is gone." He said he suspected the council would learn the truth of that saying very soon. Then Daniel Hayes walked out of the council chamber. His footsteps echoed on the polished floor as he crossed the vast space. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody called him back. They all just watched in stunned silence as the human ambassador left their presence without asking permission. The doors closed behind him with a soft sound that seemed too quiet for such an important moment. Inside the chamber, the council members looked at each other with confusion and uncertainty. Outside the chamber, Daniel Hayes allowed himself a small smile as he headed back to his ship. He had just done exactly what his government had sent him to do. Now the real plan could begin. 3 weeks passed after Daniel Hayes walked out of the council chamber. During that time, the Galactic Council continued with its normal business. They passed laws and settled disputes between member species. Nobody mentioned Earth or the humans who had withdrawn. It was as if the entire incident had never happened. But the Council did keep one eye on the sensors pointed toward human space. They wanted to see what would happen when the Kryn swarm arrived. The swarm was the most feared threat in the galaxy. It was not a species or an empire. It was something more like a force of nature made of living ships that consumed everything in their path. Each swarm ship was the size of a small moon. They were organic vessels grown rather than built. Their hulls could adapt to any weapon after being hit once. Their numbers seemed endless. In the past 1,000 years, the swarm had consumed 47 different species. Billions of lives had been lost. Entire civilizations had been erased from existence. The Council had weapons that could fight the swarm, but it was always expensive. Ships were lost. Soldiers died. Resources were consumed. That was why they had voted not to help Earth. The humans were simply not worth the cost. So the Council watched their sensors and waited to see Earth die. They expected it to be quick. Maybe a few days of futile resistance before the swarm consumed the planet and moved on. Some of the younger Council members had never seen a world fall to the swarm. They watched with morbid curiosity. The swarm reached the outer edge of Earth's solar system on schedule. The sensors showed massive bioships moving through space with terrible purpose. They passed the outer planets without slowing. Their target was the third planet from the sun, the planet where billions of humans lived and worked and raised their families without knowing that help had been denied. Counselor Zareth watched the display with his large insect eyes. He felt no guilt about the decision. Guilt was an emotion for species that could afford it. The Council dealt with reality, and the reality was that Earth could not be saved. Then something impossible happened. The first wave of swarm ships reached an invisible line in space and simply stopped existing. One moment they were there on the sensors. The next moment they were gone. Not destroyed, not scattered. Just gone as if they had never been real. Zareth made a sound of confusion. Around him, other council members leaned forward to look at their displays. Everyone was checking their equipment, thinking there must be a malfunction. But all the sensors agreed. The swarm ships had been erased from reality. The second wave of the swarm spread out. They were adapting as they always did. The swarm was not intelligent in the way most species understood intelligence, but it could learn. It could change tactics. It had to, or it would never have consumed so many worlds. More swarm ships vanished when they crossed the invisible barrier. Then something appeared on the sensors that made Counselor Vorn's crystal body flash with shocked colors. Ships were coming out from behind Earth's moon. Human ships. But they did not look like the primitive fusion drive vessels that Earth had shown to the Council. These ships were sleek and perfect. They looked like someone had taken pure mathematics and turned it into metal. They bent light around themselves in ways that made them hard to see even on sensors. There were only 50 of them facing thousands of swarm vessels. Zareth expected to see a brave but pointless last stand. Instead, he watched an execution. The human ships moved through space with precision that should not have been possible. They did not fly like ships. They moved like thoughts, like ideas given form and purpose, weapons fired from the human vessels. The Council's sensors could not identify what kind of weapons they were. They had never seen energy signatures like this. Whatever the weapons were, they cut through the swarm's adaptive armor like it was not even there. A swarm ship that could take sustained fire from Council battleships for hours was destroyed in seconds. Then another. then 10 more. The human ships moved in patterns that seemed random, but resulted in perfect efficiency. Not a single shot was wasted. Not a single movement was unnecessary. Celine watched with her fur standing on end. Her species had been warriors for 10,000 years. She understood combat in a way few others did. What she was seeing was not just superior technology. It was superior tactics, superior strategy, superior understanding of three-dimensional warfare. The battle lasted 2 hours. When it was over, more than 3,000 swarm ships had been destroyed. The rest were retreating, running away. The swarm never retreated. In 1,000 years of recorded history, the swarm had never once fled from a battle. But it was fleeing now. The human ships did not pursue. They simply held their position in a perfect defensive formation and watched the swarm leave. Then they turned and disappeared back toward Earth's moon as if nothing important had happened. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Everyone was talking at once in a dozen different languages. The translation devices could barely keep up. Accusations were being thrown around. Counselor Vorn demanded to know why their intelligence had failed so badly. Zareth insisted that Earth had lied about their capabilities. Counselor Thane spoke up then. Thane was old even by the standards of his long-lived reptilian species. He had been on the council for 300 years and had seen many things that others had not. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a knife. He told them that Earth had not lied. The council had never asked the right questions. The council had assumed, and assumptions were not the same as truth. He reminded them that humans had been exploring space for over 200 years before joining the council. He asked if they really thought a species that survived would spend 2 centuries developing nothing more than primitive fusion drives. The question hung in the air and nobody had a good answer. They had all assumed that humans were technologically backward. They had assumed that a species so new to galactic politics must be weak. They had seen what they expected to see and ignored everything else. Admiral Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship called the Valiant. Around him, his crew worked in calm silence. They had trained for this moment for years. They had practiced and prepared until every movement was automatic. Now that the battle was over, they were already running diagnostics and checking systems. A young officer named Karen Phillips turned from her station. She reported that all ships had minimal damage. No casualties. The enemy was in full retreat. She spoke in a flat professional tone, but Kyle could hear the excitement underneath. He told her to let the swarm go. He ordered her to send the battle data to Ambassador Hayes so he would know the results. Then Kyle looked out at the stars and allowed himself a small smile. The first part of the plan had worked perfectly. Now it was time for the second part. He asked Karen if she thought hiding their strength had been the right decision. She was young and still learning. He wanted to know what she thought now that she had seen the results. Karen was quiet for a moment. Then she said she understood the strategy but wondered how many lives they could have saved if they had revealed their capabilities earlier. Kyle nodded. It was a fair question. He told her that maybe they could have saved hundreds or thousands. But if they had shown their hand too early, the council would have moved to neutralize them. The council would have seen Earth as a threat instead of an irrelevance. More people would have died in the war that followed. He explained that sometimes being quiet was the hardest choice. You had to know when to speak. You had to wait until you were strong enough that your voice would matter. Until you had something worth saying. Then Kyle ordered his communications officer to open a channel to the Galactic Council. It was time to see if they were interested in talking now. The emergency session of the Galactic Council happened within hours of the swarm's defeat. Every single member was present. The chamber that usually echoed with casual conversation was silent, except for the sound of the holographic display showing the battle footage over and over again. Ambassador Daniel Hayes stood in the center of the chamber once more. He wore the same dark suit he had worn 3 weeks ago. His posture was the same. His expression was calm and neutral. But everything else had changed. This time nobody was laughing. Counselor Zareth stood up from his seat. His insect body was tense and his voice lacked the mocking tone from before. He addressed Daniel carefully. He said the council had witnessed Earth's defense against the Kryn swarm. He said the council wished to understand how Earth possessed such capabilities when they had believed humans to be technologically inferior. Daniel stood there and said nothing. He just looked at Zareth with that same calm expression. The silence stretched out and became uncomfortable. Council members shifted in their seats. They were not used to being the ones waiting for answers. Celine spoke next. Her voice was much more respectful than before. She admitted that perhaps the council had been hasty in their previous assessment. She said the council would like to reopen discussions about Earth's membership. She spoke as if she was offering Daniel a great gift. Daniel said one word. No. The word seemed too small for the enormous chamber, but it filled the space completely. Councillor Vaughan's crystal body pulsed with confused colors. He asked Daniel to clarify. Was he really refusing to rejoin the council? Daniel explained that Earth had submitted its withdrawal 3 weeks ago. That decision was final and would stand. His voice was polite but firm. There was no room for negotiation in his tone. Zareth pressed forward. Surely now that the council understood Earth's true capabilities, they could negotiate better terms. Technology sharing, trade agreements, perhaps even a seat on the security directorate. He listed benefits as if they were treasures being offered to a beggar. Daniel smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. He told Zareth that he misunderstood the situation. Earth was not interested in negotiating. Then he activated his personal display and projected data into the center of the chamber where everyone could see it. He began to speak, and his words were measured and clear. For the past 40 years, while Earth maintained council membership, they had been watching. They had listened carefully to everything the council said and did. They had observed how the council treated species they considered weak. They had seen how the council responded to threats and allocated resources and set priorities. Daniel highlighted specific examples in the data. When the Kryn swarm attacked the Delothian system, the council had debated for 3 weeks before sending aid. By the time help arrived, 12 billion Delothians were dead. When a plague struck the outer colonies, aid was delayed because the affected species had insufficient trade value. The council had calculated that saving them would cost more than they were worth. The chamber remained absolutely silent. Some council members looked uncomfortable. Others tried to maintain expressions that suggested these decisions had been reasonable at the time. But nobody interrupted Daniel. He continued explaining. Earth had seen a clear pattern. The council protected those who were powerful or useful. Everyone else was expendable. So humanity asked itself a question. What happens when you are neither powerful enough to demand respect nor weak enough to be dismissed? What happens when you are just average? The answer was simple. You get ignored. You get sacrificed when it becomes convenient. You get left to die while the council debates the economic value of your survival. So Earth decided to do something about it. Daniel explained that they became quiet. They limited their technology displays to exactly what the council expected from a young species. They asked for help they did not truly need. They played the role that had been assigned to them, and all the while they prepared for the day when the council would show its true nature. Councillor Thane spoke up then. His old reptilian eyes were sharp despite his age. He asked how long Earth had possessed the weapons and ships they had displayed against the swarm. Daniel answered simply, long enough. He explained that humans had a talent for innovation when survival was at stake. Earth had been exploring space for over 2 centuries. Did the council really think they had spent all that time developing nothing more than fusion drives and kinetic weapons? He added that humans also had a talent for patience, for learning from observation. The council had taught Earth valuable lessons about trust and alliances, and the price of depending on others for protection. Earth had learned those lessons well. Celine's fur rippled with obvious distress. She asked Daniel what Earth wanted then. Why was he here if not to negotiate? Daniel told her he was there to deliver a message. Earth would defend itself. Humans would maintain their colonies and protect their shipping lanes and secure their borders. Earth would also defend any species that requested aid, without requiring council approval first. Zareth protested immediately. The council had jurisdiction over all military actions in chartered space. Earth could not simply act independently whenever they wanted. There were rules and procedures and established protocols. Daniel corrected him gently. The council had jurisdiction over its members. Earth was no longer a member. As for chartered space, he thought the council would find that human colonies now existed in 43 systems that the council had designated as uninhabitable or worthless. Earth had maintained silent ownership of these territories for decades. That gave humanity considerable latitude for independent action. The implications of this statement hit the council members like a physical blow. 43 systems. Colonies that had existed in secret for years or even decades. resources and territory and strategic positions that the Council knew nothing about. Earth had not just been hiding military technology. They had been building an empire right under the Council's collective noses. Councillor Vorn declared this unacceptable. The Council could not allow a rogue military power to operate without oversight. It was dangerous. It was destabilizing. It threatened everything the Council had built over thousands of years. Daniel picked up his briefcase and moved toward the exit. He told Vorn that the Council had a decision to make. They could treat Earth as a threat and waste resources on a conflict they could not win. Or they could accept that humanity was no longer asking for permission to exist. He paused at the doorway and looked back. His government had authorized him to establish diplomatic relations with any species who wished to negotiate directly with Earth. They offered fair trade and mutual defense pacts and technology sharing. But only with those who approached humans with respect rather than condescension. Celine stood up from her seat. Her voice carried a warning. She told Daniel he was making a mistake. The Council had maintained galactic order for 10,000 years. Earth risked destabilizing everything by acting independently. Daniel shook his head slowly. He told her that Earth was not making a mistake. Earth was correcting one. Then he wished the Council members a good day and walked out. This time his footsteps seemed louder somehow. Each step echoed with finality. The Council members watched him go, and nobody tried to stop him. When the doors closed behind Daniel Hayes, the chamber remained silent for a long time. Finally, Thane spoke. His voice was tired and sad. He said that the Council had created this situation through arrogance. They had assumed that power meant wisdom. They had believed that age meant superiority. They had looked at humanity and seen primitives when they should have seen survivors. Zareth demanded to know what they should do now. Thane looked at the insect counselor with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. He said they should do what they had failed to do before: listen, learn, and hope that humanity was more forgiving than the Council had been. Outside the station, Daniel Hayes boarded his ship and gave orders to return to Earth. As they jumped to faster-than-light travel, he allowed himself to feel satisfaction. The plan his government had spent decades preparing was working perfectly. Now the real work would begin. 2 months passed after Earth withdrew from the Galactic Council, and the political landscape of known space changed in ways nobody had predicted. The Council still existed and still passed laws and settled disputes, but their authority was no longer absolute. Their word was no longer final, and that changed everything. The first species to approach Earth directly were the Delothians. They were the same people who had lost 12 billion souls while the Council debated whether helping them was economically viable. Their ambassador was a tall woman with blue skin named Kira. She had lost her entire family to the Kryn swarm, and she remembered every day of those 3 weeks when help did not come. Kira met with Daniel Hayes in a simple conference room aboard an orbital station. There were no fancy decorations or impressive displays, just 2 people sitting across a table from each other. Kira spoke bluntly. She said her people wanted what Earth had, not the weapons or the technology. They wanted the conviction. The willingness to act without waiting for permission from those who did not care if they lived or died. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood what she meant. Earth could offer defensive technology and military training. In exchange, Earth needed access to Delothian agricultural innovations. Human colonies were expanding into hostile environments and needed better adaptation techniques. Kira agreed immediately. Then she asked what else Earth wanted. Daniel said mutual defense. If either species was threatened, they would respond together, not because a council ordered it, but because they had chosen to stand together. Kira extended her hand in the human custom she had studied. She said they had a deal. Daniel shook her hand, and the first formal alliance of what would become the Independent Systems Coalition was born. By the end of that month, 17 species had withdrawn from the Galactic Council to join the new coalition. These were worlds that had always existed on the edges. Too remote or too small or too poor to matter in council politics. They were the species that got ignored when they asked for help and got blamed when things went wrong. Now they had an alternative. Earth offered them respect instead of condescension, fair trade instead of exploitation, mutual defense instead of conditional protection. The choice was easy for many of them. On Earth, in a facility deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, Admiral Kyle Morrison briefed a room full of officers. Some were human. Others were Delothian or Korthan or Valeth. All of them wore the uniform of the Coalition Defense Force. Kyle told them plainly that the Council was not happy. Intelligence reports suggested the Council saw the Coalition as a threat to their authority. There were discussions about a show of force to bring the member systems back in line. Essentially, the Council was considering starting a war. Commander Karen Phillips asked if Earth was really prepared to fight the entire Council fleet. She was young, but she had proven herself capable. Kyle had promoted her after the battle with the swarm. Kyle looked at her with a slight smile. He said Earth had been preparing for that possibility since the day they joined the Council. But he did not think it would come to war. Then he activated a display showing ship movements across a three-dimensional map of known space. The Council's strength had always been in their unified front. They presented themselves as inevitable, as the only possible source of order and protection. But if you looked carefully at the pattern, you could see cracks forming. 4 Council species had approached Earth through secret channels. They were asking questions about the Coalition. They wanted to know if there was really room for independence. They were tired of being told what to do by species that looked down on them. Captain Henry Brooks asked what this meant. Kyle explained that the Emperor had no clothes. The Council maintained power through the illusion of inevitability. They had convinced everyone that their protection was essential, that nobody could survive outside their structure. Earth had just proved that was a lie. More than that, Earth had proved something else. A species did not need to be the oldest or the most advanced to be successful. They did not need Council approval to defend themselves or form alliances or explore new territory. The Council had built their authority on fear and dependence. Earth had broken both. Kyle zoomed the display to show the core systems where the most powerful Council members lived. He explained that the Council could not afford to attack the Coalition. If they committed their fleet to a conflict with Earth and its allies, they would leave the core vulnerable. Other threats existed in the galaxy beyond the Kryn swarm. Pirates, rogue AI, dimensional incursions. The Council could not fight everyone at once. But if the Council did nothing more, species would leave. The cracks would become breaks. The unified front would shatter. Either way, the Council's monopoly on power was ending. Karen asked what the Coalition should do. Kyle said they would wait and prepare. The Council would try diplomacy first. They would offer concessions and threaten consequences. They would attempt to divide the Coalition by making special deals with individual members. The Coalition's job was to stay unified, to make it clear that humanity was not interested in dominance or control. Earth just wanted independence and was willing to help others achieve the same goal. As long as the Coalition maintained that position, they would continue to grow. The briefing ended, but Kyle asked Karen to remain behind. When everyone else had left, he asked if she still had doubts about the strategy. Back during the swarm battle, she had wondered if hiding Earth's strength was the right choice. Karen thought carefully before answering. She said she understood the strategy now, but she still wondered about the lives that could have been saved if Earth had revealed their capabilities sooner. If they had acted instead of waiting. Kyle acknowledged this. Maybe hundreds of lives could have been saved, maybe thousands. But if Earth had shown their hand too early, the Council would have moved to neutralize them before they were ready. The Council would have seen them as a threat. They would have used economic sanctions or diplomatic pressure or, if necessary, military force to bring Earth back in line. More people would have died in that conflict, and Earth might have lost. Timing mattered. Knowing when to speak mattered. They had waited until they were strong enough that their voice would be heard and respected. He looked out the window at Earth, rotating slowly below them. Sometimes the hardest part of staying quiet was knowing when to finally speak. You had to wait until you had something worth saying, until people were ready to listen. Karen said she understood. Then she asked what would happen next. Kyle admitted he did not know exactly. The Council might accept the new reality and adapt. They might fight and lose, or they might do something unexpected. Politics was always unpredictable. But he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never go back to how it was before. Earth had changed something fundamental. They had proved that the Council's authority was not inevitable or necessary. That species could stand on their own if they had the courage to try. Over the next months, more species joined the Coalition. Some left the Council formally. Others maintained their Council membership but signed separate treaties with Earth. The galaxy was becoming multipolar. Power was spreading out instead of concentrating in one place. The Council adapted slowly. They began offering better terms to their remaining members. They responded faster to threats. They showed more respect to species they had previously ignored. It was not enough to stop the bleeding, but it was something. Counselor Thane watched all of this from his seat in the council chamber. He was old enough to remember when the council had been formed. Back then it had been necessary. The galaxy was chaotic and dangerous. Species fought each other constantly. The council had brought order and peace. But somewhere along the way, the council had stopped serving and started ruling. They had forgotten that authority was supposed to be earned, not demanded. The humans had reminded everyone of that lesson. Thane hoped the council would learn from it. In his private quarters, Counselor Zareth reviewed intelligence reports about Earth's hidden colonies. 43 systems. Some had been inhabited for 50 years or more. The humans had been planning this for longer than he had realized. He felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Respect. The humans had outplayed the council completely. They had been patient and clever and ruthless in their planning. Zareth had underestimated them. He would not make that mistake again. The galaxy was changing and there was no stopping it now. 6 months after Daniel Hayes walked out of the council chamber, the galaxy had been transformed. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. 23 species had formally withdrawn to join the Independent Systems Coalition. Another dozen remained in the council but had negotiated separate treaties with Earth and its allies. The unified authority that had ruled known space for 10,000 years was breaking apart. Some species welcomed this change. They had always felt constrained by council regulations and condescension. Others feared it. They believed that without a single strong authority, the galaxy would descend into chaos. Wars would break out, trade would collapse, civilization itself would crumble, but the chaos did not come. The coalition proved that species could cooperate without being forced. Trade routes remained open. Disputes were settled through negotiation. Life continued much as it had before, except now there was a choice. Species could join the council or the coalition or remain independent. Power was no longer concentrated in one place. Counselor Zareth requested a private meeting with Ambassador Daniel Hayes. They met in neutral territory at a small diplomatic station on the border between council space and coalition territory. The station was modest compared to the Grand Council chambers. Just a few meeting rooms and basic facilities. Zareth arrived first. He paced the small room with nervous energy. When Daniel entered, Zareth did not waste time on pleasantries. He told Daniel bluntly that he had destroyed something that took thousands of years to build. Daniel sat down calmly and poured himself a cup of coffee from the dispenser. He looked at Zareth with those steady eyes. He said he had not destroyed anything. He had simply revealed what the council built for what it truly was, a protection racket dressed up as civilization. Zareth's mandibles clicked with controlled anger. He insisted Daniel understood nothing. The council had maintained peace and order. Without a unified authority, the galaxy would descend into chaos and suffering. Daniel asked whose peace and whose order. He reminded Zareth about the Delothians who were left to die, about the outer colonies ravaged by plague while the council debated economic value. The council had maintained order for those who already had power. For everyone else, they offered scraps and called it protection. He leaned forward and spoke quietly. The coalition was not perfect. They would make mistakes. They would have disputes and disagreements. But at least they would face these problems as equals, not as supplicants begging for scraps from an indifferent authority that viewed them as lesser beings. Zareth demanded to know what would happen when the next great threat emerged. Something worse than the Kryn swarm. The coalition was fragmented. Resources were scattered. How would they survive without the council's unified command? Daniel smiled. He said humans would survive the same way they always had. By adapting. By working together, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. By being underestimated right up until the moment they proved everyone wrong. Zareth was silent for a long time. His insect eyes studied the human carefully. Finally, he asked what Earth truly wanted. What was the end game? Daniel's answer was simple. Earth wanted to be left alone. Humans wanted to build their communities and protect their people and live their lives without asking permission from those who thought they knew better. And they wanted the same freedom for any species that desired it. Zareth asked if that was all. Daniel replied that it was everything. The council could continue to exist. Earth had no interest in destroying it. But the council would exist as one power among many, not as the sole authority. That was the new reality. The question was whether the council would adapt or fade into irrelevance. Zareth stood to leave. At the doorway he paused and looked back. He admitted that he had underestimated Daniel and humanity. He had underestimated their entire species. He promised he would not make that mistake again. Daniel told him that was good, because humans were done being quiet when it mattered. They had said what needed to be said, and the galaxy had finally listened. 3 years passed. Daniel Hayes retired from diplomatic service and returned to Earth. He bought a small house in the Colorado mountains with a view of the stars. He spent his days writing memoirs and his evenings on the porch watching the sunset. The Galactic Council still existed, though it was much smaller. Some species remained loyal out of tradition or genuine belief in the Council's purpose. Others stayed because they feared change more than they desired freedom. But the Council's absolute authority was gone forever. The Independent Systems Coalition grew stronger with each passing year. More species chose independence over subjugation, chose cooperation over obedience. The coalition was not perfect. There were arguments and disagreements and occasional conflicts. But these were resolved through dialogue rather than diktat. Humanity became known throughout the galaxy for a simple truth. They were quiet when necessary, but when they spoke, their words carried weight. They did not make empty threats or false promises. When they said they would defend someone, they did. When they offered friendship, it was genuine. One autumn evening, Admiral Kyle Morrison visited Daniel at his mountain home. Kyle had also retired from active service, though he still advised the Coalition Defense Force. The two old friends sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and red. Kyle asked if Daniel ever regretted the decision. Walking away from the council, some historians argued that Earth could have reformed the council from within. That change could have been achieved without splitting the galaxy. Daniel was quiet for a long time. He watched the colors fade from the sky as day turned to night. Finally, he spoke. He said he regretted every life they could not save. Every world they reached too late. Those regrets would stay with him forever. But did he regret the decision itself? No. The council had shown its true nature. Reform from within would have taken centuries if it was possible at all. Meanwhile, species would continue to suffer and die while the council debated their economic value. Earth had taught the galaxy something important. Respect was not given to the strongest or the loudest. It was earned by those who stood firm in their principles, who acted when action was needed, who remained silent only long enough to learn what was worth saying. Kyle repeated the phrase softly. The quiet man who leaves, Daniel finished the thought, has already said everything that needs to be said. They had made sure the galaxy was finally ready to listen. As night fell, the stars emerged above them. Thousands of points of light representing worlds and civilizations and possibilities. Somewhere out there, human ships patrolled alongside coalition allies, protecting the weak, defending the vulnerable, proving every day that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or technology. It was their refusal to be anything other than themselves. Their refusal to accept that things had to stay the way they had always been. Their willingness to stand up and say no to those who claimed authority without earning respect. Daniel thought about the young officer Karen Phillips who had asked if hiding their strength was the right decision. She was a captain now commanding her own ship. She had learned the lessons that Kyle taught. That sometimes silence was more powerful than shouting. That sometimes you had to wait for the right moment to speak. But most importantly, she had learned that when you finally did speak, you had to mean what you said. Words without action were just noise. But words backed by conviction and capability could change the galaxy. The two old men sat in comfortable silence as the temperature dropped and the stars grew brighter. They had both spent their lives in service, negotiating and fighting and planning for a future they might not live to see. Now that future had arrived, and it was better than they had dared to hope. The galaxy was not perfect. There were still threats and dangers and species that chose oppression over freedom. But there was also choice now. There was possibility. There was proof that a different way was achievable. Daniel Hayes had walked out of that council chamber 6 years ago, and the echo of his departure was still reverberating. Species that had suffered in silence for generations were finding their voices. Alliances were forming based on mutual respect rather than fear or necessity. The old order was dying and something new was being born. Kyle stood to leave as the night grew cold. Before he left, he thanked Daniel for everything. For having the courage to walk away when it mattered. For trusting that humanity was strong enough to stand alone. Daniel shook his head. He had not done it alone. It had taken thousands of people working in secret for decades. Scientists developing weapons in hidden labs, engineers building ships in orbital facilities, diplomats carefully managing Earth's reputation, and most importantly, it had taken every human who believed that their species deserved respect. Kyle drove away down the mountain road and Daniel remained on the porch watching the stars. He thought about all the species out there who were learning what humanity had always known. That survival was not about being the strongest or the most advanced. It was about refusing to give up, about adapting and learning and never accepting that defeat was inevitable. The quiet man had left the council chamber that day, but his message remained. Respect could not be demanded.